Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And I'm Aaron Waite.
And this is our first EXTRAsode, which you can probably tell is a little bit different from what we normally do. Carter is not with us today. Instead, in his place, we have my youngest brother, Aaron Waite.
Hello.
Yeah, Aaron, thanks for being on the show.
Not a problem.
Can you tell people a little bit about your background with solo games?
I have very little. The little bit of board game playing that I have done has been because of Brandon introducing me to different games. But solo board games overall, this is kind of the first solo game that I've really delved into.
But you and I have played a few games before, right? Like we played Mage Knight and Mansions of Madness and several games really over the last few years. You do like board games, you just generally don't choose to play them solo, right?
Sure, yeah. I spend my solo time doing other things, but I do enjoy a good multiplayer board game for sure.
Well, those other things that Aaron tends to do with his time is actually why we have him as a guest on this show, because today's game that we're going to be talking about is Coldwater Crown, which is a game from Bellwether Games and designer Brian Sewer for 1 to 4 players, and it's a game about a fishing tournament where you are competing against other players in the multiplayer game for the Coldwater Crown. You'll be catching fish over the course of the game by casting bait into the lake and the river and by the shore. And at the end of the game, you're going to take a look at the fish that you've caught, submit them to a contest, and maybe get some extra points there, plus some points for the different kinds of fish that you catch along the way. When we originally got this game in, I thought maybe I would review this with Carter. But Carter's not really into the idea of a fishing board game, right? Which I get. It's not for everybody. It did interest me because I was interested in a theme that's different from what we normally see. I find this sort of thing refreshing. I'm not a fisherman, really. I've gone fishing when I was growing up, but it's not, my preferred hobby or anything. But for you, Aaron, it is. Like when you're not working, you would prefer to be in the woods or on the lake, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, me and some friends from work and church, we go fishing probably at least 2 or 3 times a week, especially now that the summer's kicked in. We're wading streams, trout fishing over at the lake, bass, bluegill, catfishing, and I have experienced some deep sea fishing also. So it's a lot of fun, and it's a good way to spend my time, and I live right by the lake and river, so it's convenient and fun.
So Aaron was a natural person to have on this episode, and because this is the first episode we've done without Carter, and it's a little bit different than we normally do, this is going to be something a little strange for us. This won't be a proper episode in the sense that it won't be numbered the same or anything like that. This is going to be a first of what we're going to call EXTRAsodes, where from time to time we may have on a guest reviewer. Sometime when we have a game that maybe doesn't work for both of us, or we just find something extra we want to review, we're going to have on a guest, and we'll put up an extra episode for you. Hence the very clever title, EXTRAsode. Because this is an EXTRAsode, then this won't have all of the components of our normal episodes. We won't be talking about the news here. We're just going to get straight into the review itself. And so, like we always do, we'll start the review by talking about the components. Aaron, what did you think about the components for this game?
The components for this game worked really well. They were very simple. They were sturdy. They looked good. The artwork was phenomenal. The different species of fish were very accurate to their actual biological look. But they worked really well. I really enjoyed it because the components were so simple. But at the same time, the components work really well together to give you a more realistic feel that you are competing in a fishing tournament.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. This isn't like the coolest box of components you've ever seen, right? This isn't a CMON game, but it's not trying to be. There's not a bunch of miniatures here. There's just a cool central board that's beautifully illustrated by Beth, is somebody that a lot of people know and love in the board game industry. She's done games like Sunset Over Water. Really wonderful artist. And so the board looks fantastic. The cards are good quality cards. They're those smaller Hobbit-sized cards, so they are a little bit more difficult to shuffle, but you don't really have to do a lot of shuffling in this game, so it's not a big deal. Everything just has a nice, clean, pretty look to it. And even the little player boards that you get, there's a central player board where you can see the different places where you'll go fishing. but your player board is actually like a little tackle box.
That's my absolute favorite piece of the artwork.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. It really sucks you into the theme, I think.
For sure.
And over the course of the game, too, you'll get pieces of bait that you put in your tackle box, which are these little different brightly colored crystals that look great, and you get to draw them from a bag, and putting your hand in the bag and sort of rattling them around to pull some out. It just feels great. It's a great tactile experience. So overall, the components for this game are great, and the rules, I would say, are mostly good too, right?
Yeah, the rules are good. They have a really good system of checks and balances throughout them. Generally, the rule book was easy to understand. There were a few places where I was a little lost, but luckily you had already played through the game a few times, and where I kind of had some misunderstandings or was a little unsure about the cut and dry with the rules, you were able to actually kind of catch me up on some of those confusions. But yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah, I think it does too. Aaron brought up a point before this that I think is a valid one. You know, like a lot of games, you have all the normal rules for the multiplayer game at the front of the rule book, and then on the last page, there's a page dedicated to the solo experience. And typically that works pretty well for me. But Aaron pointed out, and I think this is a good point, that the setup changes for solo, and there are a few of them, are included at the back of the book. And so you need to flip back and forth between the solo page on the back and the normal setup at the front in order to set up the game. And you'll have to do that for some of the rules too, to see how this changes the normal rules. It would have been nice if maybe instead of that, the solo rules were sort of marked out in little boxes along the way. Like in the setup section, here's how you set up the game. And then, hey, here's a little side box that says, if you're playing solo, do this instead. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Because as I set the game up, I went straight through the game rules and set it all up. And then I got to the back and I was like, oh, okay, we've got some solo stuff here. And then I was kind of stuck trying to go back and figure out what exactly and where did I maybe miss things or set things up incorrectly, and then trying to fix them and flip-flopping back and forth throughout the whole rule book. Kind of made it a little frustrating. So footnotes or anything like that could have just kind of been put into place would have been a lot easier.
Or even just a nice player aid that maybe includes multiplayer, player aid walkthrough on the front and solo on the back or something like that. Sometimes that's done. I think that would have been nice to have in this game. Not necessary, really, because it's not a rules-heavy game at all. Overall, it's pretty simple mechanically, but it would have been a nice thing. And the solo rules for this are pretty well done, I would say. I mean, they're simple. It's one page of rules that adjust how you play the game. And I really appreciate that, because sometimes these solo variants that you find in the rule book are multiple pages long, right? And it becomes kind of a bear to manage all of it. Once you've played through the game a couple of times, you might have to do a lot of a rule book flipping the first few times. But beyond that, I don't think you'll have much trouble. It's mechanically pretty straightforward, and the solo rules make good logical sense, I think.
Yeah.
So that brings us then to the play of the game. And this is an action selection style game where you're essentially trying to take actions with these wooden pawns that you have, these little wooden discs that have a number 1 on the front and a number 2 on the back. So you're trying to place them in free spaces on the board to take an action. And if you place them with the one side up, you take sort of a weaker version of that action. And if you place them with the 2 side up, there's a stronger version. And so over the course of the game, and what you're going to do on your turn is you'll place out one disc, and then you'll pick up another. And you'll do the action of both of those spots on the board. But when you take that second disc, after you've taken the action, you flip the disc over so that the next time it's your turn, you'll be placing that disc out. And if it was a 2 when you picked it up, it'll be a 1 when you put it out this next time. So there's some thought that goes into how you manage putting out and picking up the discs and trying to time that just right so that you can do the things you want to accomplish on your turn. I don't want to make it sound like it's too brain-burny, right? Because it's really not.
No, it's not that difficult. It does have, definitely there is a level of strategy involved, but a lot of it is timing. It's when and where, and due to how the baits work. There's certain colored baits for certain areas. So the shore versus the river, you're going to have different baits that you can cast for those positions. So it's timing the number of baits that you can get rid of, when you can get rid of them, where you should get rid of them, and when you should be using that number 1 or saving that number 2. And I could see how this game would be a lot different playing multiplayer and a lot more challenging for sure playing multiplayer. Not to say, though, that it isn't challenging as a solo game.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the reason that it's a challenge as a solo game is because the core mechanism of the game is a challenge. So actually putting out the discs and placing them on a spot and picking them up, that's an interesting decision right there. But then the spaces themselves and the actions they allow you to do are also really unlike anything else I've seen in a worker placement game before. Because normally, when you play this kind of game, when you place out a pawn to take an action, you're getting some kind of resource, right? Often that's what happens in these games. You collect enough of these resources, and then you can build a building that gets you points, or that gives you some action you can take. There is an element of that set collection here, but it's definitely not the primary thing. What you're trying to do instead, most of the action spaces on the board, like Aaron said, are color-coded to match either the river, the shore, or the lake. On your personal player board, you have bait in 4 different quadrants in your tackle box that you're trying to cast at those locations in order to catch a fish. And let's say I place my pawn on the lake spot, right? That if I place a 1 pawn on the lake spot, that lets me cast bait of the color of that spot from my tackle box to try to catch a fish. And what that looks like when you take that action is I would take 1 piece of bait of that color from each quadrant on my player board. And whenever one of those quadrants then is empty, then I will catch a fish in the color of the last piece of bait that I cast and at the zone that matches the zone on my player board and the zone on the main board of that type. So let's say my last piece of bait that I cast from one zone is yellow zone 3, right? Well, then that means I'm going to catch the fish in spot 3 of the yellow area, right? So there's some planning that goes into basically timing when you cast your last piece of bait so that you get the kind of fish you want to catch.
Right, because in each different section of the game, whether it's the river or the shore, there's so many different species. I think it's 4 different or maybe 5 different species in each of those areas. The game ends with whoever gets to 12 different species first. So if you have a bunch of brown trout already, you're not going to want to catch more brown trout out of the river. You're going to be trying to get a rainbow trout or going for whatever else is there that maybe are species that you're missing, whether it's you're trying to get enough different small species to get into the small species challenge. So timing is a big, difficult thing to kind of manage sometimes because you're limited.
Right. And you could just cast bait without a thought and just see what you catch, right? You could certainly play the game that way, but I think you'll probably lose because at the end of the game, you're going to be entering fish into competitions for each of those 3 areas. And the way you enter those competitions is, let's say it was time to score the lake competition. Okay, well, I need to look at all the fish that I've caught from the lake, and I need to pick my heaviest fish from each species, add all of their weights together, and then submit it. And whoever has the highest score there as weight score for the lake will get the first place tile, which gives you 5 points. The person who gets second place will get the 3-point tile. You want to be able to have a diverse catch so that when you go to enter your fish, you're entering fish of different types so that your weight total is higher. So you need to be careful about what you pick, because if I go to enter the lake competition and I've got some really heavy fish, but they're all the same species, I'm probably going to lose.
Right. But there's also too, as you catch the fish, you can flip them over and look at the back and it tells you the tag color, which that's a whole different competition, or it helps you in a different way in the competition. But let's say the pike, which is a lake fish. You catch the pike and they have a range. Each fish has a range of poundage of what you might catch. So if you catch a pike and it's like the very lowest end of that range, and you've got time on your hands and you think you can make it happen to maybe catch a heavier fish of that same species, and you have a way of doing that, that was actually something that I was able to do, and I got lucky and catch the heaviest pike that there was. And so that really helped me because that was the biggest species that they had in that area, and that actually boosted me up enough to win the lake competition. So yeah, it definitely is hard. You don't want to waste time just constantly catching the same thing, but sometimes you can be intentional to try to catch the same species again to maybe get a higher weight.
And so you're trying to balance then what kind of fish you catch, and by taking primarily these casting actions at the different spaces on the board. But also then you're trying to manage which spaces on your player board have bait in them, right? Because you don't want to just run out of bait, because suddenly then your actions aren't very efficient. You know, if I take an action to cast bait, I want to make sure I have bait in all 4 of my zones so that I'm getting the most for that action, so I can be regularly catching fish. That's a really neat idea, trying to balance going to get more bait, which is its own action, with actually casting the bait. Plus, there's the other wrinkle in this, which is normally when you cast bait from your player board, it just goes into a discard pile. Well, there's a section on the board instead where you can try to get certain fish that are part of what's called a Master Angler Challenge. And if you take an action to go get one of these fish, it's like you're targeting trying to catch this specific fish. And whenever you discard this bait from your player board, instead of just putting it right into the discard pile, it will instead go on to this Master Angler card and go toward a set collection type mechanic where, you know, eventually if I get 2 green and 3 purple, I catch this Master Angler fish. And there's benefits to doing that, because at the end of the game, you'll get 1 point for every Master Angler fish you've caught. And 1 point in this game is a big deal because it tends to be a relatively low scoring game. And then 2, there are different challenges on the board. In addition to like the lake and shore challenge, you also might be trying to catch 4 Master Angler fish of the same species, or 3 different Master Angler fish of different species. So it's basically a more efficient way to cast your bait if you're willing to give up the action to go get this thing in the first place. So lots of really interesting balancing kind of work that you need to do in this game. Lots of things to think through, but it never turns into like Zolkin, which is, for you, I think, maybe the most brain-burning game there is.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it wore me out pretty quick. Another great thing, too, about the Master Angler Challenge, though, too, is when you take those species, and like he was saying, you can take your casted bait and put it on those cards rather than in the discard. When you're playing the solo version of this game, all of those baits that go into that discard pile are actually used by the AI. So the AI turn, after you've discarded, the way the AI works is you're going to select 1 jewel or 1 bait out of the bag, and depending on the color of it, you're going to see how many of that same color you have in your discard. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And then based on the number of that color, the AI catches a fish of that color in the zone based on the number of that color in the discard. So if you get those Master Angler cards, it's also really helpful because you're not putting more bait into the discard that can be used by the AI.
Which is one of the things I really like about the solo mode for this game, because actually managing how the action discs are placed on the board is pretty simple. It's just on the AI player's turn, you pull a piece of bait out of the bag, you look at what color it is, and you move that disc on the board to the next spot, right? It's very simple. Pretty random, but very simple. And it feels random too when you have to look at the color of that random piece you pulled. This AI player may catch a fish of that type, and you don't really have any control over what kind of jewel you pull from the bag, right? What kind of bait. So that can feel a little bit bad sometimes when you pull this thing and you feel like, golly, he's just getting lucky, getting all the right colors he needs to catch more fish. And that's true. And it can be lucky when, you pull that piece of bait and it moves a disc on the board to the next spot where you really needed to take an action. Unlike a multiplayer game where you can see what another player is trying to go for and guess where they might go next and adjust your strategy accordingly, it doesn't feel great when it's just sort of arbitrarily blocked for you. But deciding, is it worth it to try to go for these Master Angler fish just as a way of keeping these pieces of bait out of the discard pile so they can't be used by the AI player, is really interesting. all of a sudden you're not just managing your own stuff. You're also trying to actively keep the AI player for getting things that would help them, which for me is interesting. That creates the sort of tension that you need to make it feel more like a multiplayer experience.
For sure.
And it's not the same thing, but it does create more than just an interesting puzzle to solve. It does, give you a win condition, because you don't win this game in the solo mode unless you beat the score of this AI character.
Which is not easy.
It is not easy.
It is a difficult game because they start out with an upper hand, and at any point in the game, if I remember this correctly, once you take your turn and you go and you're pulling for the AI to see if that player will catch a fish, if you actually have more caught fish than the AI, it doesn't get one turn, but it gets 2 turns.
Right.
So the checks and balances with that are really good because it does make it challenging. It's not simple to beat the AI. It is not an easy game to play solo, but it is a lot of fun that way because it always does feel like a challenge, and you're always kind of nervous of, am I going to take the right risk at the right time strategically? Because so much of it is kind of based on the risk factor. You can strategize all you want, but when it comes down to it, there is that random action that the AI takes, pulling from a bag to figure out where those discs are going to be moving, and it can soil every strategy that you have really quickly.
Yeah, I think that's true. And mitigating that kind of luck that the AI player has, that's your job. And the fact that it's your job means that even though you might get hosed by the luck, and that's still possible, you at least do have some agency in the game trying to mitigate that for yourself and to help you do better. You mentioned the difficulty. That's definitely one of the strengths of this game, in my opinion. Whenever I play a solo game, if I win the first time, I'm always disappointed, especially if there's not a difficulty adjustment system. I want this to be a kind of puzzle that has some longevity. And I did not win. I mean, I came close, and it didn't feel like a blowout, and I felt at the end like my poor decisions were what led to my loss. I could see how that wouldn't always be the case, and it could feel like you were beaten by luck. But that's how I felt. You managed to lose the first time.
No, I actually won both games.
Oh, you won both games?
I won both games. The first game, I actually thought that I got completely wrecked by the AI. And then we were counting up scores, and it just so happened that I got lucky that multiple species of fish that I caught had the correct tag color, which also helped me in my score and got me some extra points. And I actually won by 1 point my first game, which I was completely shocked whenever we counted the points up, and it blew me away because I was like, no, there's no way. This AI's kicked my butt the entire time.
Right.
I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm still trying to fill it out and figure it out. And I wasn't necessarily disappointed, but I was shocked because it was a lot of luck that played into that, even on my side. So the luck isn't just on the side of the AI. It also comes to you when you're casting for fish. You don't know what those tag colors are. You don't know the weights, anything. And your first cast to try to get this new species, you might get the heaviest one that there is of that species. So it works really well. But the second game, I actually kind of had a better idea. And I invested more into using those master angler fish, which did keep him from catching fish as quickly coming out of the bag. But then too, every time I would get a fish or two ahead, then he would start getting 2 turns every time he would come up. So once again, the checks and balances of it work really well, and the mechanics of it work really well to always kind of keep you on your toes and to keep trying to figure out strategies because the strategy can change so quickly.
Yeah, I would say that's true. The luck in this case is probably a double-edged sword. It does definitely play into the next thing we're going to talk about, which is replayability for this game. I think that because there is so much luck in where the AI player is going to move next, what fish come out, what the tag color is for the kind of competition you're going to have in that realm, that changes from game to game. The fact that you have a mystery weight challenge here where you get a point if you get a fish that has, that's 2 pounds, you automatically get a point for that challenge, right? All those things help to make the game variable and definitely replayable. But at the same time, that means, if one player gets lucky and just happens to catch fish that are the right weight, then they get 2 or 3 points easily if that happens a couple of times in the course of a game, and that can make or break a game for you, whether you're playing multiplayer or playing solo. And so I do think, though, this game is pretty replayable. It would be more so for me if there were variable player powers. That's one of my favorite things in a game anyway, where, if I am playing Bob the Fisherman and you're playing Ralph the Fisherman, and each of those has different things they can do better than the other person. I think that would be a really cool addition to this game, add a little bit of asymmetry. But even without that, there's enough variable setup here that I think, this can feel fresh for you over multiple plays. It's not the kind of game you're going to play over and over and over again, at least for me, on a very regular basis. Because it has that mix of luck and strategy, light strategy, and tactics, it feels relaxing without being a total luck fest in a way that would make me want to pull it out, 2 or 3 times a year. Right?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that entirely.
But the setup itself isn't static. And so I think there is lots of good built-in replayability in this game. So I think it's about time for us to go ahead and wrap up by talking about our final thoughts for the game and what we thought was good about the game, what was bad, and what was ugly. And for me, there's a lot of good in this game. It's a pretty game. It's light and easy to get into, but still offers some meaningful decisions. I really like how the theme is integrated. What attracted me to this game initially was the fact that it was a different kind of theme, and I really hope they did it justice. And I'm not a fisherman, but I do feel like the theme was done justice.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Actually, when Brandon had mentioned this game to me and talked about playing it and helping out with the podcast, I was really excited because it was a game that wasn't based on anything fictional, and especially science fiction, because so many board games are. It's hard to really find any that really kind of seem like an accurate interpretation of any real challenge or competition. And being somebody who loves to fish, it really was an accurate way to build a game around an idea. The concepts of risk and the concepts of strategy and kind of the way the game works, I would say that it was intentional when the creator built this game, that when you actually go out and you're fishing, if you throw the wrong bait at the wrong time of year or in the wrong water for the wrong species of fish, there's so many different variables that you're not going to have any luck. So you got to know when and where and why and how, which seemed relevant in this game. And I feel like they did a really good job with that. And I thought that was really fun. That made it fun.
And yet at the same time, even if you go out and do all those things, you cast the right bait on the right day in the right water, there's still the element of luck too, which is also present in this game. Maybe the fish aren't biting, right? For whatever reason, you may not catch the fish that you're aiming for.
Right.
No matter how hard you try.
Yeah, for sure. When you go out to the lake and you're throwing a black and blue booyah bass jig with a black trailer and it gets smacked by a rainbow trout that's not even 9 inches long, which did happen last year to me. And I was super confused because I was like, there's no reason that this should have hit on a bait that's almost half its size. But that's just the luck of fishing. Sometimes things happen for no real good reason and you get lucky to catch something you're not expecting. And sometimes that's a great thing and sometimes it's a frustrating thing.
I understood so little of that example. I feel like I have a pretty good idea of how people feel now when I talk about board games to people who don't care or understand about them. So thank you.
No problem.
Yeah.
It's a humbling experience.
Your expertise is appreciated.
For sure.
So for me, then, most of this game is good. It has a good replayability, good strategy, luck mixture, really does the theme justice here. Pretty good rule book. All these things are in its favor. Do you have anything you want to add there?
I really don't have any quarrels with this game. For being somebody who's not super, super big into board games, I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun playing it. And as Brandon knows, he kind of has to twist my arm sometimes to get me to play a game with him when he gets something new. But I was excited about this one going into it just because it was something that did interest me personally. And being somebody who never sits down and plays a solo board game, I would think about purchasing this game and playing it a few times a year, which says a lot, as Brandon knows, because I'm really not the kind of person to sit down and play a game as it is. So I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it too. I do think I would put a few things in the bad column. Sometimes the luck is a little too swingy for me, and I do wish that some of those setup instructions and things about the solo game had been better incorporated into the rulebook and then also summarized at the end. But those things are pretty minor for me, honestly. I have nothing ugly to say about this game at all. At the end of the day, I'm not going to give it the Solosaurus stomp of approval, only because we reserve that for games that we really love and that both of us really love. And for me, I like this game. It's a good, relaxing experience. It didn't blow me away, right? I think it's a good game, and I think for a lot of people, this is going to be the game that they've been looking for a long time, because there's nothing else really quite like it out there, either mechanically or in terms of theme. And so if you are looking for a game that maybe is more sports oriented, or especially outdoor sports, if you enjoy that and you think this is a theme that you would enjoy, if you enjoy games that are kind of breezy feeling, that leave room for you to make decisions, but that aren't just total brain burners, that have good replayability, I think this is a game for you, for sure. The people at Bellwether Games have done a marvelous job with this, and I certainly recommend it, even though we're not giving it the full stomp of approval. It's a very good game.
I think it would be a lot easier to maybe gauge the negatives of the solo play, which I know that this podcast isn't about multiplayer games, but to give it a multiplayer playthrough just to see how differently the mechanics work. The multiplayer may be by far way better, or it may be by far way more enticed with luck and frustrating and not relaxing at all. But I would be interested in giving it a multiplayer play just to kind of see how that changes my interpretation of the solo play of it with the mechanics and everything else. But yeah, I really don't have anything bad to say about it. I think it is solid all the way around. And it is definitely unlike any other game I've ever played before.
And I will mention too, I do think this is a game that is ripe for expansions. And we haven't seen one of those come out yet, but as I understand it, and I've learned about this after we got this game to review it, there is going to be an expansion for this game coming out on Kickstarter this month, and I'm posting this in June. And the expansion is called The Sea, and I don't know a lot about it except that I have seen some of the pieces, and it adds some boats. That it looks like you need to take a boat from the main board to the sea, which is on a sideboard area where maybe you could catch more different types of fish. It doesn't look like it adds a lot of complexity to the game, but having another area where you could cast bait would make things interesting, and being able to do that while also trying to manage something else like boat travel or something, I think that's a neat idea. Definitely, if this is something that interests you, I would bet you can pick up the main game as well as the expansion through the Kickstarter if that's something you want to do. So be sure to check that out, because this is a very solid production. And that's all we've got for you this episode. If you haven't yet, be sure to follow us on Facebook. You can find us there. You can also find us on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to send to us, you could send it at solosaurus@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so yet, please be sure to go on iTunes and rate or review us on there, because the more people do that, the more people see this show when they search about board games, and the more we can do for this show. Until next time, though, my name is Brandon Waite.
And I'm Aaron Waite.
And this is Solosaurus.